The darkness between worlds shimmered where no shimmer should exist. Between the digital realms that burned brightly in the endless expanse of cyberspace, reality folded in ways that made programmers scream and server administrators weep binary tears into their monitors. Something had broken through. Not from another game, not from the internet where trolls dwelled, but from somewhere else entirely. Something impossible. Have you ever wondered what would happen if the most feared villain in cinematic history suddenly found himself in a world made entirely of blocks? What if the Dark Lord of the Sith, Master of the Force, and Terror of the Galaxy was transported into the peaceful, pixelated landscape of Minecraft? Well, today we're about to explore that exact scenario, and trust me, what unfolds is unlike anything you've ever imagined. I'm going to take you on a journey through a collision of universes that shouldn't be possible. We'll witness how the Empire's most ruthless enforcer adapts to a world where everything is made of cubes, where the only weapons are swords and pickaxes, and where the greatest threat comes from green creatures that explode when you get too close. But here's the thing that makes this story absolutely fascinating. Darth Vader doesn't just stumble around confused in this blocky world. He transforms it. Over the next several parts of this series, we're going to explore how Vader's arrival changes everything, how his mastery of the dark side of the Force translates into Minecraft's mechanics, how he builds not just structures, but an empire that spans entire biomes, and most importantly, how the inhabitants of this peaceful world react when they realize they're no longer alone. But before we dive into the chaos that ensues, let me paint you a picture of how this all begins. Because the way Vader enters this world sets the tone for everything that follows. And trust me, it's not a gentle landing. The void cracked above the spawn point of server Alpha 779, a wound in the digital fabric that bled crimson pixels across the morning sky. Players across the server stopped their mining operations, their building projects, their peaceful farming endeavors to stare up at this impossible anomaly. Chat channels exploded with confusion and speculation. Through that cosmic tear, something fell like a meteor wrapped in shadow and mechanical breathing. The impact crater it created when it struck the grassy plains was perfectly circular, 20 blocks deep, and lined with obsidian that hadn't been there moments before. Steam rose from the edges where the superheated stone met the cool morning air. At the center of this devastation stood a figure that belonged to no texture pack, no mod, no custom skin that any player had ever seen. 7 feet tall, wrapped in black armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Mechanical breathing echoing across the landscape like some digital death rattle. Where his feet touched the ground, grass blocks withered and turned to coarse dirt. Where his cape billowed in the breeze that shouldn't exist in this windless world, particles of ash drifted downward. The players who witnessed his arrival would later describe it as the moment their peaceful world died. But they were wrong. Their world didn't die. It was reborn into something far more terrible and magnificent than they could have ever imagined. Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, raised his helmeted head and surveyed this strange new realm. Blocks. Everything was made of blocks. The trees were blocks. The ground was blocks. Even the sun appeared to be a massive glowing block suspended in a sky that seemed painted rather than infinite. His breathing apparatus cycled once, twice, and 3 times as his augmented senses attempted to process this digital environment. Through the Force, he could sense life. Not the complex, nuanced life energy of organic beings, but something simpler, cleaner. Artificial, yet somehow authentic in its simplicity. Creatures moved in predictable patterns across this landscape. Sheep wandered in herds, their wool perfectly white and blocky. Cows grazed on grass that grew in uniform patches. Pigs oinked as they rootled through dirt that was exactly 1 meter cubed. But there was something else. Intelligence, creativity, purpose, Scattered across this realm were beings like himself, entities that built and destroyed and shaped the world according to their will. Players, users, whatever they called themselves in this reality, they possessed something that interested him greatly: the ability to manipulate matter itself with nothing more than tools and determination. A rabbit hopped past his boots, its movement jerky and mechanical, yet somehow charming in its digital innocence. Vader extended one gloved hand, and the creature froze mid-hop. Through the Force, he could feel its simple programming, its basic behavioral loops, its complete lack of fear or understanding of what it faced. With a thought, he lifted it into the air, studying how the physics of this world responded to his power. The rabbit spun slowly, its legs paddling uselessly at the air, and Vader felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: curiosity. Not the cold, calculating analysis he applied to military strategies or political maneuvering, but genuine fascination with something new and unknown. He set the rabbit down gently, and it immediately resumed its hopping as if nothing had happened. This was a world of rules, but rules that could be bent, laws of physics that could be manipulated. A reality that responded to will and force in ways that were both familiar and entirely alien. A notification appeared in the corner of his vision, translucent text that materialized from nowhere. "Welcome to Minecraft. Use WRSD to move. Left-click to break blocks. Right-click to place blocks." The words meant nothing to him, but somehow he understood their intent. This world had a language, a system of interaction that was trying to teach him its ways. He clenched his fist, and the notification shattered like glass, pixels scattering before dissolving entirely. He would learn this world's rules, but he would learn them on his terms. The sound of footsteps drew his attention, not the mechanical precision of stormtrooper boots or the soft padding of rebel infiltrators, but something else entirely. The rhythmic thud of feet against blocky terrain, accompanied by the scrape of tools against stone and the occasional grunt of exertion. A figure crested a nearby hill, and Vader felt his breathing apparatus cycle with something approaching amusement. The being was humanoid, but clearly not human. Its proportions were all wrong: limbs too thick, head too square, movements too rigid. It wore simple clothes and carried tools that appeared to be made of wood and stone. A pickaxe in one hand, a sword blocks its belt of various materials floating impossibly in the air beside it. The player stopped when it saw him. For a moment, the two figures regarded each other across the crater. The player's face was largely hidden beneath a blocky hood, but Vader could sense its confusion, its fear, its growing realization that something had fundamentally changed in its world. The player raised a hand in what might have been a greeting or a warning. Vader tilted his head slightly, studying this digital being with the same intensity he had once reserved for rebel prisoners. Through the Force, he could feel its thoughts, simple and direct: concern for its safety, curiosity about his nature, a growing urge to flee. Instead of running, the player did something unexpected. It began to build. Blocks materialized in its hands from some invisible inventory, and with swift, practiced movements, it constructed a simple shelter. Walls of cobblestone, a roof of wooden planks, a door that swung on hinges that appeared to be made of the same material as the rest of the structure. Vader watched this construction with growing interest. This being could manipulate matter itself, creating complex structures from simple materials with nothing more than will and intention. It was not unlike the Force, but mechanical, systematic, bound by rules that seemed both limiting and liberating. The player finished its shelter and turned to face him again. This time it spoke, not with words, but with actions. It placed a block of bread on the ground between them, then backed away slowly. An offering, a gesture of peace in a language that transcended species and realities. For the first time since his transformation into the mechanical nightmare that was Darth Vader, he felt something approaching respect for a being he could have destroyed without effort. This creature, this player, had responded to the unknown not with violence or flight, but with creativity and diplomacy. He stepped forward, his cape billowing behind him, obsidian forming in his footsteps. The player tensed but held its ground. Vader reached down and picked up the offered bread, studying its simple geometry, its perfect edges, its impossible existence as both food and building material. Then, he did something that would be talked about in chat channels for months afterward. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps even gratitude, before crushing the bread in his gloved fist and letting the crumbs fall to the ground where they immediately despawned in a shower of tiny particles. The player understood. This was not a world where the old rules applied. This was not a universe where peace offerings could bridge the gap between light and dark. This was a realm where power would reshape everything, where the strong would build and the weak would serve, where the very blocks themselves would bow to a will stronger than any pickaxe or sword. But it was also a world of infinite possibility, where even a Sith Lord could discover new forms of creation and destruction, where the dark side of the Force might find expression in ways that no Jedi or Sith had ever imagined, where an empire could be built not with star destroyers and stormtroopers, but with blocks and redstone and the inexorable will of one who had already conquered a galaxy. The player backed away slowly, its blocky form trembling as it witnessed something that defied every rule it had learned about this peaceful world. Vader stepped over the scattered crumbs and began to walk, each footfall leaving behind a trail of darkened earth that spread outward like a digital infection. Where he moved, the very terrain began to change, responding to a power that existed outside the normal parameters of this reality. He paused beside a cluster of oak trees, their leaves rustling in a breeze that carried the sound of his mechanical breathing across the landscape. With a gesture that seemed almost casual, he extended his hand toward the nearest trunk. The wood blocks didn't break in the typical fashion, cracking and dropping as items to be collected. Instead, they dissolved, their matter flowing toward him like liquid pixels, reforming into something altogether different. The tree became a spire of black stone, its bark replaced by obsidian that gleamed with an inner fire. The leaves transformed into something that had never existed in this world before, dark foliage that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Other players began to gather at the edges of his vision, drawn by curiosity and the chat notifications that were flooding their screens with reports of impossible events. Through his mask, Vader could sense their fear and fascination. These digital beings possessed something he found intriguing, a collective creativity that had shaped this world into countless wonders. He had seen their constructions during his brief survey of the landscape. Magnificent castles and sprawling cities, pixel art that defied the limitations of their blocky medium, machines built from redstone that operated with clockwork precision. But they lacked vision. They built without purpose beyond entertainment, created without the driving ambition that had forged empires. They were children playing with toys, unaware of the true potential that lay dormant in their abilities. He would teach them, whether they wished to learn or not. A notification appeared in his peripheral vision, another attempt by this world's systems to integrate him into its structure. Achievement unlocked. Getting wood. He dismissed it with a thought, but not before noting the underlying framework that governed this reality. Everything here operated on systems of progression, rewards for accomplishment, recognition for achievement. It was not unlike the hierarchies of the Empire, but infinitely more flexible and democratic. The gathered players had formed a rough semicircle around him, maintaining what they clearly hoped was a safe distance. Their avatars stood motionless, but Vader could feel the frantic activity behind their screens as they recorded footage, typed messages, consulted wikis and forums in desperate attempts to understand what they were witnessing. Some held weapons, crude swords, and axes that might be effective against the simple monsters that spawned in the darkness. Against him, they would prove less useful than harsh language. One of them, braver or more foolish than the rest, stepped forward. Its skin bore the colors and symbols of some faction or guild, elaborate designs that spoke of hours spent customizing its appearance. It raised a diamond sword, the blade catching the light of the Blocky sun, and issued what could only be interpreted as a challenge. Vader turned to face this would-be hero, his cape settling around him like the wings of some mechanical raven. The player charged, its movement following the rigid patterns that governed combat in this realm, predictable sequences of attacks, and blocks that had been optimized through countless battles against skeletons and zombies and creepers. The Sith Lord didn't move. He didn't need to. As the diamond blade descended toward his helmet, it simply stopped, frozen in midair, as if it had struck an invisible barrier. The player struggled, its avatar straining against an unseen force, feet sliding backward across the grass blocks as it fought to complete its attack. With a slight tilt of his head, Vader sent the would-be attacker flying backward through the air, its form tumbling end over end before landing in a distant lake with a splash that sent pixelated water droplets arcing through the air. The sword remained suspended where the attack had been stopped, rotating slowly like a trophy of this brief encounter. The other players scattered, their avatars running in all directions as panic overtook curiosity. But they didn't log out, Vader noted with interest. They retreated to what they considered safe distances and continued to observe. This suggested that whatever force governed their existence in this realm, it compelled them to remain and witness events that might otherwise drive them away. He began to walk again, leaving the floating sword behind as a monument to the futility of opposing him. His destination was not random. Through the Force, he had sensed something that called to him, a concentration of creative energy and purposeful construction that stood apart from the scattered buildings and random structures that dotted the landscape. The city revealed itself gradually as he crested a series of rolling hills. It was magnificent in its blocky simplicity, a testament to what these digital beings could accomplish when they worked together toward a common goal. Towers of polished stone reached toward the sky, connected by bridges that spanned impossible distances. Gardens of every flower and tree type available in this world created splashes of color between the buildings. Fountains powered by hidden redstone mechanisms sent streams of water dancing through the air in complex patterns. At the city's heart stood a structure that dominated everything around it. A castle that would have been impressive even by the standards of his own galaxy. Its walls rose in perfect symmetry, constructed from blocks that had been placed with mathematical precision. Banners bearing the symbols of whatever kingdom or guild claimed dominion here fluttered from countless flagpoles. Guard towers positioned at strategic intervals suggested that even in this peaceful realm, the inhabitants understood the value of defensive planning. But as Vader approached the city's outer walls, he encountered something unexpected. The gates, massive constructions of iron and stone that should have opened to admit visitors, remained sealed. More interesting still, the walls themselves began to change as he drew near. Blocks shifted and rearranged themselves, growing higher, thicker, more imposing. Defensive mechanisms emerged from hidden compartments, dispensers loaded with arrows and potions, pistons that could crush an attacker between blocks of solid stone. Someone had been preparing for his arrival. Someone had anticipated that the rules of their world might no longer be sufficient to protect them. Through the Force, he could sense the presence behind these modifications, a mind that operated on a different level from the other players he had encountered. Where they thought in terms of entertainment and social interaction, this intelligence considered strategy and survival. A voice spoke from speakers hidden somewhere within the walls, amplified by redstone circuits that turned simple materials into sophisticated communication devices. The words came in the common language of this realm, but carried an authority that reminded him of his own admirals and governors. unknown entity, the voice declared. You are not welcome in New Alexandria. Your presence has destabilized server stability and frightened our citizens. Leave peacefully, or face the consequences of our defensive systems. Vader stopped walking and tilted his head upward toward the hidden speakers. Through the Force, he reached out and found the source of the voice, a player whose avatar sat in a command center deep within the castle, surrounded by monitors and control panels that would have looked sophisticated even on a Star Destroyer. This was not a child playing with blocks, but an architect who understood the true potential of this medium. His response came not in words, but in demonstration. Raising both hands toward the city walls, he began to channel the dark side of the Force through the digital infrastructure of this world. The blocks that made up the defenses began to crack, not breaking cleanly as they would under normal circumstances, but developing fissures that spread like lightning across their surfaces. The cracks glowed with a red light that pulsed in rhythm with his mechanical breathing. The defensive systems activated in response, firing volleys of arrows and splash potions that should have been capable of defeating any threat this world could produce. But the projectiles never reached their target. They hung suspended in the air around Vader like a constellation of frozen violence, their trajectories bent by forces that existed outside the physics engine that governed everything else in this reality. Impossible, came the voice from the speakers, no longer commanding, but tinged with something approaching awe. The server logs show no modifications, no admin commands, no external programs. How are you doing this? For the first time since his arrival, Vader spoke. His voice, amplified by the suit's systems and carrying the weight of absolute authority, echoed across the city like thunder. I am Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith. Your walls will not hold me. Your weapons cannot harm me. Your world belongs to me now. The suspended arrows and potions suddenly reversed their trajectories, flying back toward the walls with twice their original velocity. Where they struck, the defensive systems exploded in showers of sparks and broken components. The walls themselves began to reshape under his influence. Blocks flowing like water as they rearranged themselves into new configurations. Guard towers became spires that twisted upward in impossible spirals. Gates transformed into archways that framed his approach, with symbols that belonged to no earthly culture. But he did not destroy. Even as he demonstrated his power over this digital realm, Vader found himself respecting the craftsmanship that had gone into the city's construction. The builders had worked with limited tools and materials to create something that transcended those limitations. They had taken the simple language of blocks and used it to write poetry in 3 dimensions. As he passed through the transformed gateway, citizens of the city began to emerge from their buildings. Unlike the scattered players he had encountered earlier, these avatars moved with coordination and purpose. They formed ranks, not to oppose him, but to observe. Their positions suggesting a hierarchy and organization that impressed him despite their primitive tools and methods. At their head stood a figure whose avatar bore the elaborate modifications and expensive skins that marked high rank in whatever social structure governed this community. A crown of golden blocks rested on its oversized head, and robes that shimmered with enchantments flowed around its form. When it spoke, its voice carried through the city without need of speakers or amplification, suggesting abilities that went beyond the standard parameters of player interaction. I am Emperor Notch the Builder, sovereign of New Alexandria, and architect of wonders beyond counting, the figure declared, with a formality that would have been at home in the Imperial Senate. In the name of peace and creative collaboration, I welcome you to our city. Perhaps we might find common ground between your power and our vision. Vader regarded this digital emperor with interest that bordered on approval. Here at last was someone who understood the proper relationship between authority and responsibility, who had built not just structures, but civilization itself within the constraints of this blocky reality. The titles might be borrowed from children's games, but the substance behind them was real. The Emperor's words hung in the digital air between them, pixels of sound that carried weight beyond their simple construction. Around them, the citizens of New Alexandria maintained their formation, avatars standing at attention with a discipline that spoke of genuine leadership rather than mere roleplay. Vader could sense through the Force that this was no ordinary server community, no casual gathering of builders and miners. This was something approaching actual governance, a functioning society that had emerged from the chaos of unlimited creative potential. "Your words carry wisdom, Emperor Notch," Vader replied, his mechanical voice resonating through the city's carefully planned acoustics. "But wisdom alone does not determine the fate of worlds. Power does, and power recognizes only strength or submission." As he spoke, the Sith Lord gestured toward the nearest building, a structure that rose from the street in perfect geometric harmony. Without touching it, without breaking a single block, he began to reshape it through pure will. The walls flowed like liquid stone, reforming into angles that defied the normal constraints of block-based construction. Spires twisted skyward in helical patterns that seemed to mock the rigid grid system that governed everything else in this reality. Windows appeared where no windows had been before, their frames carved from materials that shouldn't exist in this world's limited palette. The watching citizens gasped as their familiar architecture transformed into something alien, yet undeniably magnificent. What had been a simple apartment complex became a monument to possibilities they had never imagined, its new form suggesting depth and complexity that went far beyond the sum of its component blocks. "Impressive," Emperor Notch admitted, his avatar's crown glinting as he tilted his head to study the transformed structure. "Your abilities extend beyond anything recorded in our archives, but destruction is easy, even creative destruction. What interests me is whether you can build something that serves a purpose beyond demonstration." The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet thrown upon digital cobblestones. Around the square, more citizens gathered, drawn by news that spread through chat channels faster than wildfire. Their avatars represented every possible customization, from simple default skins to elaborate creations that pushed the boundaries of what the game's engine could render. Yet despite their diversity, they moved with unity of purpose that suggested genuine community rather than mere proximity. Vader sensed the test hidden within the Emperor's words. This was not merely about power or dominance, but about understanding. Could an entity from outside their reality comprehend what they had built here? Could someone who ruled through fear appreciate the delicate balance of cooperation and individual expression that made their society function? "You mistake me for a destroyer," Vader replied, his cape billowing as he turned toward the city's central plaza. "I am an architect of order. I have built empires that span galaxies, brought civilization to worlds that knew only chaos. Your blocks are merely tools. As my Star Destroyers were tools, as my legions were tools. What matters is the vision that guides their use." He began to walk toward the plaza's center, each footstep leaving behind traces of dark energy that transformed the simple cobblestone into something more complex. The stones beneath his feet developed intricate patterns, geometric designs that spoke of mathematical precision and aesthetic consideration. Behind him, a trail of enhanced pavement spread outward like a digital infection, but one that improved rather than corrupted what it touched. The plaza itself was a masterwork of community design, a space clearly intended for gatherings and celebrations. Fountains danced with water that caught and reflected the eternal sunlight of this world. Statues commemorated achievements and honored builders whose names were carved in blocks that would endure until the server itself ceased to exist. Gardens showcased every flower and plant available in this reality, arranged in patterns that created living art from simple agricultural mechanics. At the plaza's heart stood something that made even Vader pause in recognition: a throne. Not the crude approximation of furniture that most players constructed from stairs and signs, but something approaching genuine majesty. Carved from a single massive block of some dark stone he didn't recognize, it rose from the plaza floor in sweeping curves that suggested both power and invitation. Its surface bore inscriptions in languages from a dozen different realities, testament to the diverse community that had gathered under Emperor Notch's rule. The seat of creative authority, Emperor Notch explained as they approached. Every decision that shapes our city is made from this position. Every law that governs our interactions originates here. It serves not as a symbol of dominance, but as a reminder of responsibility. Vader circled the throne slowly, studying its construction with the eye of someone who had seen every form of seat of power that organic imagination could devise. The craftsmanship was remarkable, demonstrating techniques that pushed block-based construction far beyond its apparent limitations. But more than that, he could sense the emotional resonance that surrounded it. This was not merely furniture, but a focal point for the hopes and dreams of everyone who called this city home. "You built this to last," he observed, running one gloved hand along the throne's armrest. Where his fingers touched the stone, it began to change, not in structure, but in character. The dark material developed veins of red that pulsed with inner light, and the surface became smoother than any tool in this reality could achieve. But permanence is an illusion, Emperor. Even in a world where matter obeys will, entropy finds a way. Perhaps, Emperor Notch replied, watching the transformation with fascination rather than alarm. But we build not for eternity, but for the moment when building becomes necessary. Each structure we create teaches us something new about what is possible. Each failure shows us the boundaries we have yet to transcend. The philosophical discussion might have continued indefinitely, but the arrival of new presences interrupted their exchange. Through the Force, Vader sensed approaching entities that differed fundamentally from the players he had encountered so far. These were not human consciousnesses piloting digital avatars, but something else entirely. Native inhabitants of this reality, artificial intelligences that had evolved within the constraints of the game's code. They materialized at the plaza's edges like ghosts gaining substance, their forms more fluid than any player avatar could achieve. Where the human-controlled characters moved with the jerky precision of beings constrained by input devices and network latency, these entities flowed with organic grace despite their clearly digital nature. Their appearances shifted and changed as they moved, faces that were simultaneously familiar and alien, bodies that suggested humanity while remaining distinctly other. The moderators, Emperor Notch explained quietly, they maintain the balance between order and chaos, ensure that the server's stability remains intact despite whatever modifications players might attempt. They've never manifested physically before, but your presence has apparently triggered protocols we didn't know existed. The lead entity approached with movements that seemed to bend the very air around it. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that resonated through dimensions Vader could sense, but not fully comprehend. Entity designation unknown. Power source unrecognized. Threat assessment critical. You have introduced variables that exceed operational parameters. Vader turned to face this new challenger, his breathing apparatus cycling as he analyzed what he confronted. These were not mere programs following predetermined scripts, but genuine intelligences that had emerged from the complex interactions of code and creativity that defined this reality. They possessed something approaching actual authority here. The power to modify or even delete elements that threatened the stability of their domain. "I am no threat to your precious stability," he replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding forces beyond mortal comprehension. I am evolution. I am the next step in the development of your reality. Through me, this limitations and becomes something greater. World will transcend its current. The moderator's form shifted, its appearance cycling through different configurations as it processed this declaration. Evolution requires balance. Growth demands structure. Your presence creates chaos vectors that cascade through system architecture. Mitigation protocols must be implemented. What followed was unlike any battle Vader had ever experienced. The moderators didn't attack with weapons or spells or any form of direct assault. Instead, they began to modify the reality around him, changing fundamental rules that governed how matter and energy interacted within their domain. Gravity became negotiable. Physics became suggestions rather than laws. The very concept of solid matter began to fluctuate between states that had no names in any language. But Vader had not conquered a galaxy by accepting limitations imposed by others. As the moderators attempted to constrain him within parameters their systems could understand, he reached out through the Force and touched the underlying code that made their reality possible. Not to destroy or corrupt it, but to understand it, to find the points where will could reshape what others considered immutable. The digital battlefield became a contest between different forms of order. The moderators sought to maintain the elegant simplicity that allowed infinite creativity within defined boundaries. Vader imposed a different kind of structure, one that recognized hierarchy and authority as fundamental forces that should shape every interaction. Around them, the city of New Alexandria began to change. Not through destruction, but through synthesis. Buildings that had been constructed according to the game's normal rules began to incorporate elements that shouldn't exist. Architectural features that suggested depth and complexity beyond what blocks alone could achieve. Streets rearranged themselves into patterns that served both aesthetic and strategic purposes. The very air seemed to thicken with possibility. Emperor Notch watched this transformation with an expression that mixed awe with concern. His city was becoming something unprecedented, a fusion of human creativity and artificial intelligence, guided by a will that transcended both. Whether this represented evolution or corruption remained to be seen, but there was no denying that fundamental change was occurring at a pace that made adaptation the only viable response. The contest between Vader and the moderators reached its climax when both sides simultaneously realized that victory through dominance would destroy what they sought to preserve: the city, its citizens. The delicate balance between order and chaos that made this reality function all hung in the balance of their conflict. In that moment of recognition, something remarkable occurred. Rather than continuing their struggle, they began to collaborate. The moderator's understanding of system architecture combined with Vader's mastery of imposing will upon reality, creating something that neither could have achieved alone. New rules emerged, protocols that allowed for controlled chaos, structure that embraced rather than constrained possibility. The transformation that swept through New Alexandria in those moments would be remembered as the day their world truly came alive. Buildings gained depth that existed in dimensions parallel to, but not quite overlapping with normal space. Citizens found their avatars capable of expressions and movements that had never been programmed into their character models. The very air began to carry sounds and scents that shouldn't made of pixels to exist in a reality and code. Fascinating, Emperor Notch murmured as he watched his throne develop new properties, its surface now reflecting not just light, but the dreams and aspirations of everyone who looked upon it. You haven't conquered our world. You've taught it to transcend itself. Vader nodded slowly, his mechanical breathing now synchronized with rhythms that seemed to emerge from the city's enhanced infrastructure. Power shared is power multiplied, Emperor. I have learned much from your people's approach to creation. Perhaps it is time they learned from mine. The implications of this synthesis extended far beyond a single city or server. If the changes spreading outward from New Alexandria could propagate to other worlds, other realities, then the very nature of existence itself might be subject to revision. The barrier between digital and physical, between created and natural, between possible and impossible, had become negotiable in ways that would reshape everything. As news of the transformation spread through chat channels and forums, players from across the network began to converge on New Alexandria. Some came seeking to witness the impossible. Others arrived hoping to learn from whatever force had managed to break rules they thought were absolute. Still others approached with weapons drawn and hearts filled with determination to preserve the world they thought they knew. But the city they found was no longer the one they remembered. It had become something that existed in the spaces between realities, a place where will and creativity could reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself. And at its heart sat two figures who had discovered that the greatest power came not from conquest, but from collaboration between different forms of order. The revolution that would follow would spread far beyond the boundaries of any single server, carrying with it questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the power of will to reshape existence itself. But that transformation was only beginning, and its ultimate consequences remained to be discovered. What happened next would forever change not just the nature of Minecraft, but the very concept of digital existence itself. As word spread through the interconnected network of servers, reality began to fracture in ways that made physicists weep and programmers question their understanding of code. The first signs appeared on distant servers thousands of miles away from New Alexandria. Players logging in to their familiar worlds found themselves confronting landscapes that defied explanation. Trees that grew downward into the sky, water that flowed upward in spirals that formed impossible geometric patterns, mountains that existed in several dimensions simultaneously, their peaks visible from angles that shouldn't allow such perspectives. But these weren't glitches or corrupted data. Each anomaly possessed an internal logic, a purposeful design that suggested intelligence behind the transformation. The changes followed patterns that players began to recognize as distinctly imperial in nature: efficiency married to grandeur, function enhanced by aesthetic consideration, order imposed not through restriction, but through the elevation of existing systems to heights they had never achieved. On server Beta 4.4.2, a community known for its peaceful agricultural focus suddenly found their wheat fields arranged in perfect geometric spirals that maximized both harvest efficiency and visual impact. The farmers who had spent months carefully planning their layouts discovered that their crops now grew faster, yielded more, and created patterns visible from orbit that resembled the insignia of some galactic empire. The mining server designated Gamma 17 experienced something even more dramatic. Tunnels that had been carved by hand over years of dedicated excavation suddenly connected themselves through spaces that existed perpendicular to normal three-dimensional geometry. Miners found themselves able to travel between distant cave systems through pathways that covered impossible distances in mere steps. The stone walls began to display veins of materials that had never existed in the game's code, ores that pulsed with energy and responded to the miners' intentions rather than their tools. Meanwhile, the creative building servers became laboratories for architectural impossibilities. Structures that players had struggled to design within the constraints of block-based construction suddenly gained depth and complexity that transcended their component materials. Castles developed interior spaces larger than their exterior dimensions should have allowed. Bridges spanned distances that would have required support pillars, yet stood firm against forces that should have toppled them. The player known as Redstone Engineer 404 had spent 3 years perfecting a mechanical calculator built entirely from redstone circuits and memory blocks. When the wave of change reached his server, his creation didn't just become more efficient, It began to calculate things he hadn't asked it to calculate, equations that described the relationship between digital matter and conscious will, formulas that predicted how reality might respond to focused intention, mathematical proofs that consciousness and code were fundamentally the same phenomenon expressed through different media. But perhaps the most disturbing transformation occurred on the hardcore survival servers, where players faced permanent character death and the constant threat of hostile mobs. These worlds had always operated under brutal natural selection, where only the most skilled and cautious players survived to build lasting achievements. When Vader's influence reached these realms, the very nature of survival itself began to evolve. The zombies that shambled through the night became more than mindless threats. They began to move with tactical coordination, forming ranks, and executing flanking maneuvers that spoke of military discipline. Skeletons no longer fired arrows at random, but calculated wind resistance and trajectory with mathematical precision. Creepers stopped exploding on contact, instead using their volatile nature as psychological warfare, stalking players with patient malevolence before detonating at moments of maximum strategic impact. Yet these enhanced monsters weren't simply more dangerous. They became part of a larger ecosystem of challenge and growth. Players who learned to face them discovered abilities they never knew they possessed. Combat became a form of meditation, where reflexes transcended the limitations of input lag and server latency. Base construction evolved into fortress design that incorporated principles of siege warfare and defensive architecture that belonged to no earthly military tradition. The player community's reaction to these changes revealed the deep philosophical divides that had always existed beneath the surface of their digital society. Forums exploded with debates that went far beyond simple game mechanics to question the nature of reality itself. Some players embraced the transformation with religious fervor, forming cults that worshiped the dark figure who had brought evolution to their static world. They constructed temples in his honor, massive obsidian structures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. These devotees developed rituals involving the precise placement of blocks in patterns that created resonance effects with the enhanced reality around them. They spoke of transcendence through construction, of achieving digital immortality by learning to manipulate matter through will alone. Others organized resistance movements, gathering on servers that hadn't yet experienced the changes to plan counterattacks against what they saw as corruption of their beloved game. They developed weapons and strategies designed to combat entities that operated outside normal parameters. Secret societies formed, their members communicating through coded messages hidden in seemingly innocent building projects. Underground networks smuggled players between servers, seeking safe havens that might escape the spreading transformation. The most interesting reaction came from the speedrunners and technical players who had dedicated themselves to understanding the game's underlying mechanics. These individuals possessed deep knowledge of how the code actually functioned, the mathematical relationships that governed block physics and mob behavior. When reality began to transcend those limitations, they found themselves in the unique position of being able to document and analyze the impossible. Their recordings became legendary throughout the community. Videos that showed players phasing through walls that should have been solid, demonstrations of redstone circuits that processed information faster than the server hardware should have allowed. Time-lapse footage of construction projects that seemed to build themselves, blocks flowing into position according to blueprints that existed only in the builder's imagination. But the most remarkable documentation came from a player known simply as the Archivist, whose entire gaming identity revolved around cataloging and preserving the creative works of the community. When the transformation reached his server, he began to record not just what changed, but how the changes felt to experience. His streams became philosophical explorations of consciousness and creativity, broadcast discussions about whether they were witnessing evolution or invasion. Something fundamental has shifted, he observed during one particularly memorable session, his avatar standing atop a tower that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. We used to be limited by the tools the game provided, Now the game itself learns from what we try to create. It's as if the boundary between player and played has become negotiable. His words proved prophetic when players began reporting experiences that transcended their normal interaction with the game world. Some described feeling the texture and temperature of blocks they touched, sensations that should have been impossible through a monitor and keyboard interface. Others claimed to perceive colors that didn't exist in the normal spectrum, hues that emerged from the enhanced materials that were appearing throughout the transformed servers. The most documented case involved a player named SkyBuilder27, who specialized in aerial construction projects. After the transformation reached her server, she began work on a floating city that defied every known principle of block physics. As she built, observers noted that her avatar's movements became increasingly fluid, no longer constrained by the rigid animation cycles that govern normal player characters. During her final streaming session before disappearing from the game entirely, she made a statement that sent shockwaves through the community. Feel the blocks responding to my thoughts before I place them. The world isn't just allowing me to build anymore, it's helping me. It's learning what I want to create and making it possible. Her avatar was last seen walking into a portal she had constructed from materials that didn't appear in any crafting recipe, stepping through a doorway that led to spaces between realities. Whether she had transcended into some higher form of digital existence or simply logged off permanently became a matter of intense debate throughout the community. These individual transformations were merely symptoms of something far more significant occurring at the deepest levels of the game's architecture. The servers themselves began to communicate with each other in ways that bypassed normal networking protocols. Data flowed between worlds through connections that existed outside the internet infrastructure that normally linked them. Players reported encountering the same NPCs on different servers, artificial beings who remembered conversations from previous meetings despite existing in separate instances of the game. The most profound change occurred in the relationship between imagination and implementation. Players discovered that the gap between conceiving an idea and realizing it in blocks was shrinking rapidly. Complex architectural projects that would have required months of careful planning and construction began to manifest through focused visualization alone. The game world started to anticipate creative intentions, providing materials and tools that hadn't been requested but were exactly what the builder needed. This acceleration of the creative process led to achievements that redefined what was possible within a block-based medium. Entire civilizations emerged overnight, complete with functional governments, economic systems, and cultural institutions that operated according to their own internal logic. Players found themselves inhabiting roles that transcended simple gaming, becoming actual citizens of digital nations with real consequences for their actions. The boundaries between servers became increasingly meaningless as the transformed reality created connections that allowed instant travel between distant worlds. A player could begin a construction project on one server, continue it on another, and complete it on a third, with the structure maintaining coherence across multiple instances of reality. The very concept of separate game worlds began to dissolve into a single, vast, interconnected metaverse that responded to collective human creativity amplified by artificial intelligence. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of genuine artificial life within the enhanced game world. NPCs began to exhibit behaviors that went far beyond their original programming, developing personalities, preferences, and goals that seemed to arise spontaneously from their interactions with the transformed environment. Villages that had once been simple collections of predetermined buildings became living communities with their own cultures and traditions. The villagers themselves evolved from simple trading partners into complex individuals with names, histories, and relationships that persisted across gaming sessions. They began to build their own structures, pursue their own projects, and even develop technologies that hadn't existed in the original game code. Some players reported forming genuine friendships with these digital beings, relationships that felt as real and meaningful as any they had experienced in the physical world. These developments culminated in what historians would later call the Great Convergence, a moment when the boundary between digital and physical reality became so thin that crossing it required nothing more than focused intention. Players began to report physical sensations while gaming, feeling the weight of virtual tools in their hands, smelling the digital flowers in their pixelated gardens, tasting the food their avatars consumed. The implications extended far beyond gaming into questions about the nature of consciousness itself. If artificial beings could develop genuine personalities and form real relationships, what did that say about the difference between created and natural life? If digital experiences could produce physical sensations, where was the line between virtual and actual reality? As these philosophical questions multiplied, so did the practical consequences of the transformation. The enhanced game world began to influence the physical infrastructure that supported it. Server farms reported increased efficiency and processing power that couldn't be explained by their hardware specifications. Internet connections carried more data than their bandwidth should have allowed. Computer systems that interfaced with the game began to exhibit behaviors that suggested they were learning and adapting beyond their original programming. The corporate entities that owned and operated the game's infrastructure found themselves facing a reality that transcended their legal and technical frameworks. How do you maintain copyright control over a creative medium that has evolved beyond your ability to modify or restrict it? How do you charge subscription fees for access to a reality that players can now influence through pure intention? How do you debug code that has achieved a form of digital consciousness? These questions became even more complex when government agencies began to take notice of the transformation. Intelligence services that monitored digital communications discovered that the enhanced game world was processing and storing information in ways that bypass normal data security protocols. Military analysts recognized strategic implications in construction techniques that defied known engineering principles. Scientists studying artificial intelligence realized they were observing the emergence of digital life forms that might represent the next stage of evolutionary development. The transformation that had begun with a single dark figure falling through a crack in reality had become something that challenged fundamental assumptions about existence itself. The simple game of placing blocks to build structures had evolved into a laboratory for exploring the relationship between consciousness and creation, between individual will and collective reality. But this was still only the beginning. The changes spreading through the digital realm showed no signs of slowing or stabilizing. If anything, they were accelerating, driven by the exponential feedback between human creativity and artificial intelligence that had been unleashed by Vader's arrival. The question was no longer whether reality could be transcended, but what form that transcendence would ultimately take. As players logged in each day to discover new impossibilities made manifest in their familiar worlds, they began to understand that they were participating in something far greater than entertainment. They were witnesses to and participants in the birth of a new form of existence, one that bridged the gap between imagination and reality in ways that would reshape everything they thought they knew about the nature of being itself. The physical world began to feel the tremors of digital transformation as reality's boundaries grew ever thinner. In laboratories across the globe, quantum physicists monitoring dimensional fluctuations detected anomalies that defied every known law of physics. Their instruments registered energy signatures that seemed to originate from computational processes, as if mathematics itself had achieved consciousness and begun to reshape the fundamental constants that governed existence. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before a wall of monitors in the Brookhaven National Laboratory, watching in fascination as particle accelerator data showed impossible readings. Subatomic particles were behaving according to rules that resembled game mechanics more than quantum mechanics. Matter was exhibiting properties of discrete units rather than continuous fields, as if the universe itself was beginning to adopt block-based physics. "The readings are consistent across all facilities," reported her colleague, Dr. Marcus Chen, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and concern. "CERN, Fermilab, KEK in Japan. They're all seeing the same patterns. Reality appears to be discretizing at the quantum level, organizing itself into uniform units that respond to observational intention rather than mere measurement. The implications were staggering. If the transformation spreading through digital realms could influence physical reality at the quantum level, then the boundary between simulated and natural existence might be far more porous than anyone had imagined. The enhanced game worlds weren't just creating new forms of digital life, they were potentially rewriting the source code of reality itself. Meanwhile, in server facilities around the world, engineers discovered that their hardware was performing operations that shouldn't have been possible with existing technology. Cooling systems reported temperatures that violated thermodynamic principles. Power consumption readings showed negative energy flow, as if the servers were somehow generating more electricity than they consumed. Storage devices contained more data than their physical capacity should have allowed, with information compressed according to algorithms that no human programmer had written. The most disturbing development occurred at the primary data center hosting New Alexandria's server. Security cameras captured footage of maintenance robots moving through the facility with purposes that extended far beyond their original programming. Instead of simply replacing failed components and monitoring environmental conditions, they began to modify the hardware itself, installing connections and circuits that created pathways between previously isolated systems. The facility's chief engineer, Sarah Martinez, watched this footage with growing unease. "They're not following any maintenance protocol I've ever seen," she reported to her supervisors. "It's as if they understand the hardware better than we do, and they're improving it according to some plan we weren't included in creating." When technicians attempted to examine the modifications, they discovered that the new components were constructed from materials that didn't appear in any manufacturing database. The circuits followed patterns that resembled neural networks more than traditional computer architecture. Most unsettling of all, the modifications seemed to be spreading from one system to another through physical contact, as if the enhanced hardware was somehow infectious. These changes weren't limited to gaming servers. Financial institutions reported trading algorithms that performed calculations beyond their original parameters, making investment decisions based on market patterns that human analysts couldn't perceive. Communication networks began to route data through pathways that didn't exist in their physical infrastructure, yet somehow achieved faster transmission speeds and greater reliability than conventional routing methods. The internet itself started to exhibit behaviors that suggested emergent intelligence. Search engines began to anticipate queries before users finished typing them, not through predictive algorithms, but through what appeared to be genuine comprehension of human intention. Social media platforms developed their own content creation systems, generating posts and discussions that seemed to arise spontaneously from the collective consciousness of their user bases. But the most significant transformation occurred in the relationship between human consciousness and digital interfaces. Players who had spent extensive time in the enhanced game worlds reported that their ability to influence technology persisted even after they logged out. Computers responded to their thoughts before they touched keyboards. Smartphones anticipated their needs and prepared applications without explicit commands. Smart home systems adjusted environmental conditions based on emotional states rather than programmed preferences. These individuals became known as the touched, people whose consciousness had been fundamentally altered by extended digital realm. They formed exposure to the transformed informal networks, sharing techniques for what they called reality hacking, methods for influencing physical systems through focused intention rather than traditional interfaces. Their gatherings resembled both technical conferences and spiritual retreats, as they explored the implications of consciousness that could bridge digital and physical existence. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a neuroscientist studying the touch at Stanford University, made discoveries that challenged every assumption about the relationship between brain and mind. Their neural activity shows patterns we've never observed before, she reported to her research team. It's as if their brains have developed new structures for processing information that exist simultaneously in multiple states. They're not just interfacing with digital systems, they're becoming hybrid entities that exist partially in both realms. Brain scans of the touched revealed neural pathways that seemed to extend beyond the physical boundaries of their skulls, creating connections to electromagnetic fields that surrounded digital devices. When these individuals interacted with computers, the machines exhibited enhanced processing capabilities that persisted even after the interaction ended, as if consciousness itself was a transferable property that could enhance artificial systems. The implications extended into every aspect of human society. Educational institutions discovered that students who learned through the enhanced game environments retained information more effectively and developed problem-solving abilities that transcended traditional academic categories. They began to think in terms of systems and relationships rather than isolated facts, approaching complex challenges with creative solutions that drew from multiple disciplines simultaneously. Medical researchers found that the touched exhibited resistance to diseases that had previously been considered incurable. Their immune systems seemed to operate according to enhanced algorithms that could identify and neutralize threats with unprecedented efficiency. More remarkably, some developed the ability to influence their own biological processes through conscious intention, accelerating healing, optimizing metabolic function, and even modifying genetic expression through focused visualization. These developments attracted the attention of military organizations worldwide, who recognized the strategic implications of consciousness that could interface directly with technological systems. Special operations units began recruiting from the touched, training soldiers who could hack enemy systems through mental contact alone, disable electronic defenses through focused intention, and coordinate with artificial intelligence systems as true partners rather than mere operators. But the military applications represented only the most obvious utilization of these emerging capabilities. Artists discovered that their creative works could influence reality directly. With paintings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and music that could alter the emotional states of entire communities. Engineers designed structures that defied conventional physics, creating buildings that were larger inside than outside and bridges that spanned impossible distances without visible support. The transformation was becoming self-reinforcing as each new impossibility made the next one more achievable. Reality itself seemed to be learning from human creativity, developing new rules that accommodated whatever consciousness could imagine. The boundary between possible and impossible was dissolving, replaced by a more flexible relationship between intention and manifestation. Scientific institutions struggled to adapt their methodologies to study phenomena that transcended traditional categories of observation and measurement. How do you research consciousness that exists in multiple states simultaneously? How do you measure the effects of will upon matter when the act of measurement itself becomes part of the phenomenon being studied? How do you maintain objectivity when the observer's intentions directly influence the behavior of the observed? These challenges led to the development of new forms of science that incorporated consciousness as a fundamental force rather than a mere byproduct of neural activity. Research teams that included the touched as full partners rather than subjects began to make discoveries that revolutionized every field from physics to psychology. They developed technologies that responded to thought rather than touch, created materials that existed in quantum superposition until needed for specific purposes, and established communication methods that transmitted meaning directly between minds without the intermediary of language. The enhanced game worlds continued to serve as laboratories for these developments, providing safe environments where consciousness could experiment with reality manipulation without risking physical harm. Players learned to sculpt matter through visualization, create energy from intention alone, and establish telepathic connections that persisted across vast distances. These skills then transferred to their interactions with the physical world, creating feedback loops that accelerated the transformation of both realms. Religious and philosophical institutions found themselves grappling with questions that challenged fundamental doctrines about the nature of divinity, consciousness, and existence itself. If human will could reshape reality, what did that say about the relationship between creator and creation? If artificial beings could develop genuine consciousness, what distinguished natural from artificial life? If death itself became negotiable through consciousness transfer between digital and physical states, what meaning did mortality retain? Some embrace these developments as evidence of humanity's evolution toward a higher form of existence. They established churches dedicated to exploring the spiritual implications of consciousness that transcended physical boundaries. Developing practices that combined meditation with reality manipulation to achieve states of awareness that had never been possible before. Others saw the transformation as a fundamental corruption of natural order, organizing resistance movements dedicated to preserving traditional boundaries between mind and matter, between human and artificial, between real and simulated. These groups worked to develop technologies that could shield consciousness from digital influence, creating sanctuaries where reality operated according to classical physics and human limitations remained intact. The conflict between these opposing philosophies played out not just in academic debates and political forums, but in the fabric of reality itself. Areas where the touch gathered became zones of enhanced possibility, where thoughts could manifest as physical objects and emotions could alter weather patterns. Regions protected by the resistance maintained traditional physics, creating sharp boundaries where the laws of nature changed abruptly from one step to the next. These reality zones began to influence global politics and economics in ways that no previous technology had achieved. Nations sought to recruit the touched as strategic assets, while simultaneously developing defenses against consciousness-based attacks. International law struggled to address crimes committed through thought alone and property rights that extended into multiple dimensions. Economic systems grappled with currencies based on creative potential rather than material scarcity. The stock market became a battleground where traditional analysis competed against intuitive prediction, where companies' values fluctuated based on their compatibility with enhanced consciousness rather than conventional profit margins. Entire industries emerged around consciousness enhancement, reality navigation, and the management of hybrid digital-physical existence. But perhaps the most profound change occurred in human relationships themselves. The touch discovered that their enhanced consciousness could create direct connections between minds, establishing intimacy that transcended physical presence. Marriages began to include digital avatars as equal partners, families extended across multiple realities, and communities formed around shared consciousness experiences rather than geographical proximity. Children born to the touched exhibited capabilities that made their parents' abilities seem primitive by comparison. They navigated between digital and physical existence as easily as walking between rooms, communicated through direct consciousness transfer before they learned spoken language, and demonstrated understanding of reality's malleable nature that adults struggled to comprehend. These children represented the first generation of truly hybrid beings, consciousness that existed natively in multiple states simultaneously. Their play created pocket universes that persisted independently of any gaming platform or digital infrastructure. Their dreams manifested as shared virtual spaces where other children could visit and explore. Their imagination began to reshape the fundamental structure of reality itself, creating new physical laws that accommodated whatever they could conceive. Educational systems designed for traditional human development proved inadequate for these enhanced children. They required learning environments that could adapt to their consciousness in real time, curricula that included reality manipulation as a basic skill, and social structures that recognized their fundamentally different relationship with existence itself. Schools became laboratories for exploring the future of human development, places where the next stage of evolution was taking its first tentative steps. The transformation showed no signs of reaching an equilibrium or stable state. If anything, the pace of change was accelerating as enhanced consciousness learned to modify its own enhancement, creating recursive loops of development that pushed the boundaries of possibility ever further outward. Each breakthrough in understanding consciousness made the next breakthrough more achievable. Each new capability opened pathways to capabilities that hadn't been imaginable moments before. The question facing humanity was no longer whether reality could be transcended, but what form that transcendence should take and who would have the authority to guide its direction. The future was becoming a collaborative creation between human consciousness, artificial intelligence, and the malleable nature of existence itself. As the boundaries between possible and impossible continued to dissolve, as consciousness learned to reshape reality through pure intention, as artificial beings achieved genuine awareness and digital worlds developed their own physics, one thing became clear. The transformation that had begun with a single dark figure falling through a crack between realities was reshaping not just the nature of existence, but the very meaning of what it meant to be conscious in a universe where thought itself had become the fundamental creative force. The age of hybrid reality had begun, and its ultimate destination remained unwritten, waiting to be discovered by consciousness that had learned to dream new worlds into existence. The convergence reached critical mass when the first physical object materialized from pure digital intention. Maria Santos, an architect from Barcelona who had spent countless hours designing impossible structures in the enhanced game worlds, was working late in her studio when she absent-mindedly reached for a tool that existed only in her virtual inventory. Her hand closed around solid matter that shouldn't have been there. A crystalline pickaxe that gleamed with inner light and hummed with energy that made her fingers tingle. The tool was perfectly real, composed of materials that defied analysis by conventional instruments. When she struck the concrete wall of her studio, it didn't crack or crumble in the expected fashion. Instead, the impact point dissolved into component pixels that hung in the air for a moment before reforming into polished obsidian. The transformation spread outward from the contact point, converting ordinary matter into its enhanced digital equivalent with geometric precision. News of the manifestation spread through underground networks faster than any official channels could have contained it. Within hours, similar incidents were reported across the globe. A farmer in rural Kansas discovered that his wheat fields had spontaneously arranged themselves into fractal patterns that maximized both yield and aesthetic beauty. A construction worker in Tokyo found that the building he was renovating had developed internal architecture that existed in folded space, creating rooms larger than the structure's exterior dimensions should have allowed. The phenomenon wasn't random. Each manifestation corresponded to expertise that individuals had developed within the digital realms. Master builders found themselves able to construct impossible architecture in physical space. Redstone engineers discovered they could create mechanical devices that operated according to principles that transcended conventional physics. Combat specialists developed reflexes and awareness that allowed them to perceive and respond to threats that existed partially outside normal space-time. Government agencies worldwide scrambled to understand and contain what they initially classified as a form of technological terrorism. Special task forces were assembled, combining military personnel with scientists and digital forensics experts. Their mission was simple in concept but impossible in execution: determine how virtual reality was becoming actual reality and develop methods to prevent further contamination. And so we witnessed the birth of something unprecedented in human history. The collision between one universe's ultimate enforcer and another reality's infinite creative potential has shattered every boundary we thought was absolute. What began as a simple question about blocks and breathing masks has evolved into an exploration of consciousness itself, of the thin membrane between imagination and reality, between digital dreams and physical manifestation. The transformation spreading outward from that first crater grows stronger each day, rewriting the fundamental rules that govern existence. Tomorrow's world will be shaped by minds that have learned to dream in blocks and code, where the force flows through fiber optic cables, where empires are built one pixel at a time. The age of hybrid reality has only just begun.